Hello. Okay, I'm going to mute myself again,
All
and
right,
I'll
so we
unmute when I need
should
to.
we should be recording right now. Welcome everyone. I just want to be efficient. Want to make sure that everybody gets their questions in, and I give you a once over. So first off, I wanted to congratulate you on passing the comps. If you haven't passed it, hopefully you will pass that in the next couple of weeks, so that we can move forward in that regard. That is a big accomplishment. Now it comes to the main event, or the main task at hand is the dissertation project, which comes with it many questions and curiosities and so forth. So the goal of this session tonight is really to address some of the basic foundations of it, but also maybe some tricks of the trade to make sure that you progress in a timely fashion as well. Okay. So just one more time, can someone confirm that you see this screen right here with my mouse moving?
Yes, I can see.
Okay,
Yes,
perfect. All right.
I do see it.
So also, if it gets too noisy or staticky or so forth, I might ask other people to mute your speakers, but for now it seems fine. All right. So let's see here. All right. So the first part here that I wanted to address is that along with the 42 credit hours as part of this program of study, the other requirement is that you maintain matriculation. And what that means at St. John's University is that you maintain enrollment in EDU 3293, which on paper it says dissertation seminar, but it's basically dissertation supervision in practice. So it's part 2 of what you did initially with Allie. That was in a group form, basically, where you started the first parts of your first 3 chapters and tried to get together a PowerPoint of sorts as you're aiming to do your proposal defense in the very near future. We're going to get into that in a little bit, but you're required to maintain this enrollment in this particular class, and that goes for this spring, and then each semester that follows until you defend your dissertation. So let's say, for example, that I see Susan's on the line right there, so I'm going to use Susan as an example. Let's say that she gets together with her committee. She has a strong first 3 chapters. Again, I'm just making this up, but it could be true. She has a strong first 3 chapters. She's going. Let's say that her supervisor and her agree that she's ready to defend her proposal in the very near future. And let's say that she does it the first week of February. Okay. And at that point, she's going to go through the IRB process. Again, I'm going to walk you through this as part of this PowerPoint, but I'm just kind of giving you a prelim. She goes through the IRB process to make sure that St. John's, as well as the district where she works or is collecting this data, agrees that this is an ethically appropriate study to conduct. She'll collect and analyze the data accordingly, and she might end up finishing the writing in the summer. Maybe she defends early fall, maybe later in the fall, maybe even in the summer. It really kind of just depends. So for average Joe out there, most people will probably have to enroll in this class spring, once in the summer, and once in the fall. I'm just throwing that out there as a possibility. Again, it depends on your design, and we're going to talk more about that as we go through this PowerPoint here. So over the break, I know many of us were working in different capacities. As they say, the work never stops. So one of the tasks that I sort of tapped myself to do was to be able to build a portal. Just like you had a portal for EDU 3292, I wanted to construct a portal for 3293, dissertation supervision, so that whoever your major supervisor is, or your, what do they call it, SJU, your supervisor, other places they call it your doctoral chair, whoever that is will be using the same portal that I designed. That's just customized according to who the instructor is. So you're going to gain access to this portal in 2 weeks' time when the semester starts. But as a prelim, you're going to have this PowerPoint, this recording that we're doing now, as well as the doctoral handbook. If you haven't gotten that already, I'm going to send it out tonight. It would be very valuable for you to review all of that right away, again, to assure that you make steadfast progress throughout next semester. Your committee membership, I tried to email this to everyone following their comprehensive exams about a week afterwards. If you have not received an email from me about your committee who your supervisor is and who are the other 2 to 3 people, please send me an email directly. You don't have to do it in this portal per se, but send me an email and I will get that information to you ASAP. I wanted to differentiate and spend a couple minutes on what are the roles of these 3 different people. Okay, so it's very specific in our regard, and that goes based upon some of our experiences over the years in supervising people. Sometimes the roles were not always clearly demarcated in terms of, okay, what is this person supposed to do versus this person versus that person. So first off, your supervisor, who was paired to you according to, many of you did a Google survey maybe a semester or 2 ago where you stated your likely methods that you would use to collect data for your dissertation, as well as your title and topic and so forth. We use that information to overlay with faculty expertise and trying to match up people in the best way possible to select a supervisor. So that supervisor is really going to be, I'm just throwing this number out there. This is kind of in the ether, if you will. That supervisor will probably be able to answer, 75% of your questions. Okay, that is your go-to person. That's the point man, the point woman, whatever you want to call it. And that's the person who really will work with you throughout the process, no matter what the question is. Now, there's 2 other people who are more of what you could call supportive committee members, right? So they're going to support your work and they're going to support your primary supervisor's review and evaluation and so forth of your work along the way. One person will be having a lens or an eye and looking specifically for research design and methods of data collection and analysis and all those sorts of things, basically chapter 3, but making sure you have a strong understanding of that before we move forward. And then the other person is going to be more of the literature and theoretical framework person. So the reason that we sort of not restrict, but position people with specific lenses in mind is sometimes if you just left it open-ended and you had 3, 4, 5 committee members and they were just looking at the study in general, then you may have more conflicting perspectives on things. And doing it this way basically assigns somebody that you're the one who's looking at research design. You think this is a good fit and you support what Envy is doing or what Susan's doing, what Adele is doing, and your supervisor agrees, okay, so we kind of move forward from there. So they're going to be looking specifically for either literature or theoretical framework or the research and the design. And we feel like that's going to work more seamlessly than just having a supervisor with other committee members that don't have specific roles and responsibilities. Okay.
No.
So from there, so this screen right here is taken directly from this portal that you don't quite have access to. Okay. And it basically is thinking forward about a timeline of sorts that I want you and your major supervisor to discuss. And one of the first things that you're going to want to do you remember the final paper that you put together for Dr. McDowell last semester in 3292? I know sometimes you might submit chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, what have you. And my understanding is then you made a PowerPoint proposal and so on.
No.
What you want to do is put all of those chapters into one file if you don't have it already. So that basically the first day of the semester, I want you to send that to your supervisor in the Blackboard portal as soon as it opens up, because right here, basically in the portal, you're going to click in there and it's going to say, please send it over to your supervisor right away. That person is going to look at it in a short amount of time as possible and basically work with you to see how close are we to that proposal's defense. So at St. John's, there's 2 defenses. There's a proposal defense, meaning does this person have a clear understanding of what they want to research in terms of an introduction and addressing a gap in the literature and in a theoretical frame that guides its research design and overall data collection analysis? Do they have the nuts and bolts and the essence of what they want to do? So when your major professor or as they call it here, your supervisor gives you the green light, then you're going to talk to your other 2 committee members to say, when is a good day, a week or 2 from now, 2 weeks from now, for me to actually do this defense. Now, when it comes to, I know many of you live in different places, right? The easiest and probably best way for you to be able to do this in a timely fashion is to do it online. Now, those of you who live nearby or Connecticut or close enough, right, Envy?
Yeah.
Then you can actually do it in person. But sometimes it's a greater challenge. Let's say like right now I'm in my home office to get everybody there on a given Thursday at 5 p.m. or whatever it might be. So that's just something to consider when you're trying to think about the proposal defense. So you could technically do that proposal defense online, and maybe for the final one, you want to come to campus or vice versa. Again, it's up to you, your major professor, and your overall committee on what can be done at that particular time. Okay, so just keep those things in mind. And then the semester deadlines, this is something else that we don't necessarily control, but it's more at the university level. It's something to be mindful of. There are deadlines for both the both the dissertation defense at the very end, as well as the final paper itself. So there's 2 separate timelines, 2 separate deadlines. So they change each semester. So I posted the ones that are most updated for the spring semester. So just using that, for example, let's say that somebody's already kind of collected their data, blah, blah, blah. You'll see right here where my mouse is. And somebody could defend their proposal before Thursday, March 26th, and submit the final edited paper that's already gone through all these hoops and so on, that's more fully discussed in the handbook and in this portal by April 16th, then that person could walk in the May graduation. So the reason that there are these deadlines there is because there's a lot going on internally as well as for you from your dissertation defense, the oral defense itself, and then getting the paper ready for printing and through ProQuest and posting it online and all these things. You know, oftentimes you'll do it in this format and somebody says that it should actually be tweaked this way. And at the end of the day, you say, whatever, here it is, however you want it, because I want it to be done with it. So another thing to note here is that we will be using 7th edition APA. So if you haven't ordered that book, I highly suggest you do so. I'm actually editing a book right now, and none of the folks out there in the US even know about 7th edition APA because they're not using it right already. No. So this is something that the field will be using starting in the spring moving forward. The 6th edition, I think, was used for about 10 years maybe or so. So it's worth investing in trying to better understand that. In this Blackboard portal, I also posted some materials on discussing the nuances between 6th and 7th edition that should be able to provide you with a primer of sorts for that too, okay? The proposal defense itself, what does it consist of and how does it work? So I want you to really think about the proposal defense as undergraduates would think about P-Chem or organic chemistry or, I don't know, a zoology lab class or something like that. One of those weed out classes, right? You remember those back in the day? And it was really hard and somebody taught the lab or whatever. Well, this is not the weed out point, but it is a point of distinction. And what I mean by that is it's very clear if you're ready to engage in your project of study or you're not. And so I really want you to work closely with the supervisor. I know you worked with Allie McDowell, but now you're going to be working with another supervisor. And if one of your committee members, let's say that you think you're ready and your supervisor thinks you're ready, and one of your committee members has a problem with the overall research design, it's better that we address that right then and there rather than 6 months down the line where you use that design and they say, hey, this is not kosher, this is not cool moving forward. And then you have big problems down the line. So for me, the proposal defense is that line in the sand where once you get that okay, it should be smooth sailing from there. So I want you to really position yourself to thrive. In the Blackboard portal, I provided samples of what this PowerPoint could look like. I know that you already have basically design one yourself. And I also have IRB templates and existing templates and letters for permission and so on. So I've tried to provide as much as possible in there. If you or your supervisor is not clear on something, please give me a call or email me or whatever. I'm going to be right here to support you throughout this process. But the thing about the proposal defense is that you're going to have to remember that we're going to fill out a form after it's successfully defended. Typically, they go for about 20, 25 minutes, where you have, let's say, a 15-slide PowerPoint presentation. You're going to also you don't have to send that early, but you're going to send your paper, which is the beginnings of the first 3 chapters of your dissertation, to your committee 1 to 2 weeks in advance to give them ample time to be able to read it, to be able to critique it, review it, and so on. And some of them can even provide you comments right away that you could address even before the defense. Some would prefer to give you the comments at the defense itself. So you'll make those changes, so on and so forth, so that at that point, that's where you go through that IRB process that we're going to talk about on the next slide. Because if you had already done that and they suggest changes to it, you would have to really start the whole process over. So there's a rhyme and a reason for it, even though we don't always agree that there should be so many steps to it. Okay. So the next part is the IRB process, the Institutional Review Board process. And the quick reason for why it exists is sometimes in more or less the hard sciences, research was not always ethical, right? So whether it be related to animals, whether it be related to humans, I know about, I want to say it was maybe 70 years ago, in Russia, they were doing these projects where they took infants and they separated them from their mothers for the first 18 months, I believe it was, 18 months of their life. They fed them, they gave them the basics, but they provided no nurture whatsoever. And from this unethical study, they found that the kids didn't have higher than a 70 or 75 IQ. And they basically screwed these kids for their entire lives, again, to try to make this determination of science, right? And so from those kinds of unethical investigations, they said there needs to be a process in place to determine the level of ethical awareness and ethics involved in these types of studies. So there's a rhyme and a reason for it. Again, my understanding is that we plugged in ethical training through NIH, which coincides with SJU requirements in the first week of 3292. Please double check that you've done that already. Double check that you have like a certificate that you could have printed from the website, that you keep that in your files, because you're probably going to have to provide that to the SJU IRB committee upon submitting this process. If you're doing research within the DOE or a large school district, they may have their own requirements. And that's why we mentioned the DOE has city requirements. And I forget what the acronym city stands for, but it's another IRB related process. And that one right here, I want you to make a note of. Your primary supervisor and you have to do the city training. And so if somebody hasn't done it already, you have to remind them that that's something that they need to do right away. I'm telling all of them that, but you're going to be the second, you're going to be seconding those sentiments. Okay.
Yes.
And so there's a new process as of about, I want to say maybe 5 months ago or so. So in the handbook, it may not have all of this information stipulated. It will be in the Blackboard portal because this is rather new. We're using a system called Cayuse right here, C-A-Y-U-S-E, Cayuse. And it's an electronic submission system so that as you and your supervisor work through these details, and I highly suggest that you send the information back and forth to your supervisor even before you push it through the system. But once you push it through, then your supervisor says, okay, I'm cool with it. Then it goes to the department chair. Then it goes to an associate dean. Then it goes to the IRB committee. So you don't want to waste those people's time, and you don't want to waste your own time knowing that it's going to sit in somebody's mailbox for a day or two before the next person. The IRB committee at St. John's meets once a month as well. And on the website, you can see when are those deadlines. So it might be you have to submit it by the 15th of the month to make it for February 1st or whatever it is. I don't know those off the top of my head. But if you just Google search St. John's University IRB, you will find those there. And let's see. So that's clear there. Let's go to the next slide on data collection and analysis. So a lot of people were emailing other faculty members as well as myself talking about, you know, timeline wise, when can I expect to graduate or finish the project and so on. And I just wanted to give you a couple of examples of what it could look like, because it's going to vary greatly with respect to the type of project that you use and the type of data that you have to collect. Keeping in mind that the summer is coming up for many students. So if you're trying to collect primary source data from students, then you're probably going to want to get on that right away in order to be able to do that in the spring. So the first example is using public secondary data sets. This could technically streamline your overall process to finish. If you think about it, you don't have to go into a school. It doesn't matter if it's during the summer or midnight or whenever else. That data already exists, and you're going to be looking at that through your own sort of project of sorts. Maybe doing a factor analysis. Maybe you're doing a multiple regression, trying to tease out some information from a public data set from the feds or something like that. Okay, but that's not necessarily that it's always going to be faster. It really just depends. A secondary option, let's say you're exploring vocabulary acquisition using mixed methods, but let's say many of you took, some of you took me for mixed methods, but some of you took Tess Dustling over the summer, and some of you also took, I guess that was probably it for you guys. But let's say that you collect the data concurrently, both qualitative and quantitative. That could actually speed the overall study up, okay, versus a sequential collected study where there's multiple phases, so on and so forth. Again, I'm giving this here. It's not necessarily relevant to your study. I'm just teasing some options out here. And then the last one I said, some people want to look at more of a longitudinal look at early literacy instruction, and something like that might take 1.5 years to collect that data across grade levels if you're staying with the same group of students, for example. So it really just depends. And the point I want to harp on the bottom is I want you to aim for quality, right? The whole reason that you're in this program is to advance what we know in the field about that specific topic. And you can't always do that when you're just trying to do a rush job, okay? This next slide here about finishing your writing, I just want to make a note here. We have 7 minutes until this apparently free session ends. So what I'm going to do when we cut off here is I'm going to send another link out, and we'll start on the second one in just a few minutes. So if we get cut off in about 7 minutes, just look for an email within about a minute from there, and we'll get right back on. Okay.
Okay.
So this is not summative. This is just to kind of give you a ballpark figure about what the overall dissertation includes. Okay. So when I say front matter, it means a lot of different things there, right? So we're going to have, for example, we're going to have an abstract. We're going to have a table of contents. We're going to have, sometimes people do like a thank you page, right? So there's a lot of stuff that goes up there in the front. I would actually suggest, and you might want to make a note of this, when you send your paper to your committee in the very near future, remember those first 3 chapters towards the proposal, I would make a temporary table of contents to fit in the beginning of that if you haven't already. Again, to help draw people's eye to be able to do the read more quickly and more succinctly. So for example, you might have, chapter 1, purpose of the study, gap in the literature, blah, 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 and on down. Again, that's going to be fluid. It's going to change, but that's a really helpful a tool to use, especially if somebody has some questions about it. You can just say, oh, well, right here in chapter 3.2, on page 27, this is what my question was about. In the introduction, again, that's kind of like, why are we doing this study? How does it fit into the research? What are your research questions, and how does it really segue and you know, how does it move forward towards your review of the literature, your theoretical framework? For some people, the theoretical framework fits into chapter 1, and for other people, it fits into chapter 2. I don't necessarily really care where it goes as long as it fits. So, for example, it might be necessary for you to talk about, let's say, a sociocultural framework for looking at why I want to study third graders' vocabulary acquisition in an urban classroom in New York City. Okay. So I want to tell you that before maybe that I want to show you the literature that I found on these topics, right? Because the literature is going to have that same slant to it. I'm not going to reference just straight cognitive literature all the way through. It's going to be kind of coming from that same point and perspective. The research design, to me, that's where, just like on the comprehensive exam, that's where you can show somebody, I understand exactly what I'm going to be doing, and you can reduce the number of questions that people are going to have on the committee or outsiders are going to have when you go to present this information or publish it or whatever else. Because once you solidify that area, then I don't know, there aren't so many questions from there. Again, if you target the design, how you're going to collect the data, how you're going to analyze, what are your research questions, what's the theoretical framework, have you targeted some seminal research in your literature review thus far, and who are those key players in that field, and then how does it fit into your life, your career objectives, and address a gap in the literature with going back to the introduction. I think that's how you solidify your preparation and level of preparedness for the overall proposal defense. So then we have what we will call post proposal, right? So the post proposal is going to be the findings, and I use the word findings to in relation to qualitative findings, and I use the word results for quantitative results. And a lot of people interchange those two, but I find that that is the best way to do it in accordance to APA format and what their expectations are. So if you have a purely qualitative study, you might title your chapter 4 findings. If it's purely quant, you might call it results. If you're using a mixed methods, I don't know, you got to figure it out. I haven't quite figured that one out yet. Maybe you can say both, findings. You know, I don't know. And then the last chapter, sometimes people use the word conclusion, but I think it's really discussion. And so I would highly suggest you have a look at differentiating in the APA manual. What's the difference between results and discussion of the results? Because especially if you're doing a qualitative study, like findings versus discussion, there's kind of a lot of overlap, or the language gets sticky. Because in chapter 4, you just want to say, what are the results? This is the numbers. This is what the effect size was. This is it. And then in chapter 5, the discussion, you want to talk about why that matters. What does that mean in the context of the classroom? What does it mean to other people? What are the implications? What are the options for further study? What were your limitations or delimitations? All those sorts of things. So it's more about what does it mean and your interpretation of it. And that's where you can also cite other literature to support you, as well as talk about how it isn't in line or it differs from the extant literature. So let's say that I found, one time I did a study and I found second graders who were above average thrived with using Greek and Latin word parts. So that was adding something new to the extant literature. Whereas I also found that if they hadn't mastered phonics skills yet, they actually regressed. And that was that was seconding what these other people said. So that's what you want to be able to do with chapter 5. We're going to be cut off here. So I'm just going to make this pause point. So I will send you the second part in 1 minute of time. I hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
I hope we have everyone joining us again. Sorry for the delay there. So I ended last
I'm not
time
seeing
on,
Jessica. She was with us, but she's not with us now. Jessica Hernandez.
Let me see what happened.
I'm not sure. I sent it through the.
I'm here.
Okay, good.
Okay. It's hard to
Thank you
see
for your
sometimes
effort.
everybody who's here.
No worries. I had to mute it because the dog's barking and stuff.
Got
So
it.
thank
Got it. Good
Okay.
idea. So yes, I was saying the findings or results and differentiating that from the discussion. And then the references, again, familiarize yourself and actually know it. I know it sounds super lame and maybe not something you want to do on a Friday night, but I would definitely read the 7th edition APA book at some point sooner than later.
Yeah.
I haven't been able to sunk my teeth into that degree, but I do know the differences by and large. And one of the ones that sticks out to me is, for example, let's say you're citing, referencing a book. You're no longer going to use the place of publication. You're just going to say the publisher. So you're not going to put Boston, Massachusetts, boom. You're just going to put Corwin Press or whatever it is. So that's just one. So knowing those things is really helpful. Again, you don't want your supervisor to, for lack of a better word, babysit you through that process. It shows that you don't sort of take those independently to be able to do well. Then the appendices will follow the references. I know that might sound, backwards, but they normally go that way. Again, all of this is going to be spelled out in the handbook that you're going to receive in just a few minutes from me via email if you don't have it already. There, it's relevant to put things like, let's say that you have a figure to sort of, like we were just talking about a phenomenology and fitting that with mixed methods. Maybe you want to create a figure for what that looks like, again, to help the readers to be able to envision this. I always suggest people do this. This is just my personal, not a pet peeve, but a personal recommendation. And that is to create a very simple table where you have research question 1, research question 2, or whatever they are. And then what is the means of data collection in this column? What is the means of data analysis? And then how are they going to integrate at some point? What's the point of integration? And if you can create a table that says this data collection is going to answer this research question, and it's going to be analyzed through factor analysis, through SPSS, and it's going to be integrated with qualitative findings right here, down here, that helps somebody really understand the overall design. It's one thing to write about the design. It's another thing to show them a visual of it. So even though you would discuss that, you might include it as an appendix. Okay. So the defense itself, a lot of people get scared or worried or timid about the defense. I see the dissertation defense as a celebratory event. And I know that might not sound right, but again, I told you the hard point is that proposal defense. That's where you're going to get some of those questions, right? So I remember somebody asked me in my proposal defense, well, how do you define reading? And I was like, oh, and then I just came up with something. But, you know, that's when those questions are going to occur, not that they're really going to. The dissertation defense is at that point, you should know more than your whole committee and really most people out there on this specific topic. And you should just be able to be well-versed to be able to present this information. This, again, can be in person on Queens campus, on our Manhattan campus even. We've done them there. Or it can be online. And we don't necessarily have a preference. It's really whatever you can work out by the deadlines with your committee and so on and so forth. So try to be flexible in that regard. Assuming that you live close, be flexible, and then just see what your supervisor and what your committee can come up with. Also, you want to give probably more time, let's say a good 2 weeks, for your committee to be able to read the dissertation paper itself prior to the defense. So let's say you're defending July 23rd. You know, you kind of want to give it to them on in the first parts of July so they have ample time to read through that. And if it's going to be, you know, 150, 200, 250 words, whatever, pages, whatever it might be, you don't want somebody to have to rush through there. And oftentimes you might even have wanted to work with an editor prior to that point so that you don't have somebody kind of nickel and diming and picking apart all these things. You want them to be able to focus on the message at hand and not sort of, a grammar or typos and things like that. Again, at the defense, we have in the portal, I provided some dissertation defense PowerPoints. and also some samples of what does a quantitative dissertation look like in general. What does a qualitative one look like? What does a mixed methods one look like? I have 2 samples of each of those domains, if we can call them that. So again, I've tried to work hard to put this portal together for you. Have a look, give me some feedback, and I'm happy to adjust it and keep making changes as we go forward to make sure you have all the information you need to succeed. And then some of the final steps. Let's say that you have defended your dissertation. We ask you to, after your 35-minute presentation, we ask you to step outside. We talk together as a committee. We talk about what is our recommendation. And it can really be typically 1 of 3 outcomes. It could be pass straight up. It could be pass with a few changes and revise these things according to such and such. Or it cannot be a good outcome, and that you would have to kind of go back into it and so on, so that you would be ready for a second attempt down the road. But let's say that that process went well, and personally, the people that I put up to defend their proposal or defend their dissertation, it always works well. And that's because I'm not going to put you up until you're ready. And that's something that you really have to trust your supervisor with, is they're the ones who are going to tell you you're ready or you're not quite ready, and you need to get better in A, B, or C. Mm-hmm. And if there's anything in doubt and you're not on the same page or whatever else, and you want a second opinion, you want my thoughts or somebody else's thoughts on it, feel free to ask whomever you'd like. There's no secret process or anything like that. We try to keep it out in the open. So let's say that you defend your proposal. I'm sorry, I keep saying proposal. You defend your dissertation. I call you Dr. So-and-so, which is a really cool feeling, kind of surreal, honestly. At that point, you cannot yet write prescriptions. That's not quite what we're talking about here. But you you like that one, Samendra? But you do get to wear a funny hat at graduation and all those kinds of things. So at that point, you're really going to be working with somebody on our campus dealing with formatting and editing, and printing, and dealing with ProQuest, where it's housed electronically forever. Like if you Google search Evan Ortlieb dissertation LSU, it'll come up. And you can see it, and you can see hopefully how maybe I'm a better writer in some regards, 15 years down the road. Maybe not. I don't know. It depends if I made any progress. But it'll be there forever. So because it's there forever, and that's sort of your record, right? Yeah. You want to make sure that there's no incidental plagiarism, that the formatting is right. All that is it has its final touches, if you will. It's on the showroom floor. Mm-hmm. And it's at that point that you ticked all those boxes that you're then eligible for graduation. Now, when we talk about graduation, SJU is quite funny in this regard. So they have one commencement, one graduation per year where they do the walk and blah, 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 blah. However, degrees can be conferred any of the 3 semesters per year. Okay, so let's say that you finish and you're a graduate of summer semester 2020, okay? You wouldn't be able to walk, get this, until spring 2021, because it only happens in May each year, okay? So again, let's say you finish December of 2020. Again, you wouldn't be able to walk till May 2021. Now, do you have to walk? Do you care to walk? That's really your prerogative. I think it's kind of a cool thing and a good a culminating activity, and everybody's there, and it's a big event. But some people don't really want to, and sometimes the timing doesn't necessarily work well depending upon when you finish your degree, when the degree is conferred. So I hope that makes sense. Most schools do it every semester. I'm not sure why SJU does it in this practice, but it is what it is. Okay. So that's how your degree will be conferred in whatever semester you finish, and beat those deadlines, like I was saying, for the defense, as well as the final paper. And then one other caveat that I wanted to bring to your attention. I want to flip back to the very beginning. Remember, we were talking about maintaining matriculation.
Yeah.
let's say that you spend a lot the spring collecting data. You're analyzing it in April and May and June. You're finishing your writing, so on, so on. And for whatever reason, you don't beat that summer deadline for the oral defense, whatever those are that have not been determined yet, but I can give you a ballpark guess, okay, at this point. So the other option is if you defend your dissertation in the first 2-ish weeks of a semester, then you don't have to pay for that semester because you didn't receive supervision during that semester, okay? And so normally that comes up over the Christmas break because that's the largest break in the academic calendar. So let's say that you couldn't quite defend, let's say by December 10th or whenever the semester ends generally, but you could defend January 30th, okay? And that falls within the first 2 weeks of the next semester. Instead of paying this instead of enrolling in EDU 3293, there's a workaround that we do where it's basically you sign up for this other class that's like $100 or something. It's basically just a workaround to keep you on the books, but you don't actually have to pay for that supervision.
Makes sense. That makes sense.
Again, I just figured the system out over the 5 years. I did not make this system, so I'm the bearer of that news, and not don't kill the messenger on that. Okay, so that's sort of where we are on that. I hope I have addressed most of your questions, most of your initial questions on that. But I thought we might spend a few minutes with any other questions that might have come up. And again, at this point, you're welcome to stay on board. You're welcome to hop off. I'm going to keep recording this. So are there any questions that came to your mind thus far?
I have an IRB question.
Okay, Susan, you were first. Go ahead.
All right. Once you submit to IRB, how long does it typically, you may have said this, but I might have missed it. How long does it typically take them to respond?
Okay. So let's run through an example. Okay. So we can figure it out together. Let's say that you submit your initial IRB for approval on the end of this month. Okay. Let's say, is it 30 days? Okay. 31, January 31. Okay. So at that point, it goes to your major supervisor. Let's say it's me. Okay. How quickly can I review it? I review things pretty quickly. So it's going to be done in 24 to 48 hours. Okay. Now, you and I are going to have already worked on this to where once it gets to me, I'm going to hit approve because I already know what are in all those boxes because you sent that to me on a PDF separately before it was ever submitted. Okay. So I already approved that more or less. I'm going to punch it through. It goes directly to my chair. She also receives an email saying, hey, this IRB is sitting in your mailbox. Check it out. If I don't hear something from her within a couple days, I send her a text or an email and I say, hey, can you punch this thing through? Okay. So I would say 2 days at each of the next two people's mailbox, Yvonne Pratt Johnson and Mary Beth Schaefer. Okay. Chair and then Associate Dean for Research and Graduate Studies. So let's say that we are at the end of the first week of February at this point. Okay. So a weekend. That's when the committee will actually receive it. Okay. Now, remember I said they have their internal deadlines. And here's something to remember for everybody. Some studies are IRB exempt, and that doesn't mean that it doesn't go through the process. It only means it goes through a shortened process. Okay. So let's say that you're only using a secondary data set, blah, blah, blah. It's probably going to be an IRB exempt process. And that means that the whole committee does not have to review it, but only one person from the committee. So if somebody says, hey, that's not really a big deal. He's just using a secondary data set over here. Big deal. I'll punch that thing right through. Okay. If you are doing videos of students on the spectrum and and it's not anonymous and and you're showing their face, all this kind of stuff, that's going to add to the degree of scrutiny that it's going to receive as part of this IRB process. So that's another thing that sometimes you want to keep in mind is, can you use audio instead of video in part of your observation or something like that? Because that's going to raise less flags, right? Can it be, can you do something related to teachers where they're adults and they can give consent themselves? Then you don't have to go to parents, right? So with each, type of data you collect, you have to think about what are the additional steps in place, and for each additional step is more time. So the direct answer to your question is, let's say that the deadline was February 15th for their May 1st meeting. You can already see the timelines adding up. And then at their May 1st meeting, they're going to give you feedback the first week of, March. On their March 1st meeting, they're going to give you feedback. And let's say that they want you to fix 3 or 4 things. Then it has to go back to them, but it doesn't go back through the whole process. It goes directly back to them. They can try to review that in a short amount of time to go ahead and push it through. So It could be the beginning part of March. So basically, in general, I normally say about a month and a half to really get through all of that vetted through and through.
Okay.
And Adele, for you, that, so you got to look at the rules. Sometimes if you have to do it for 2 different entities, right, sometimes one entity wants you to do the other people first and then come to them, or vice versa. Okay. So just make sure that you know those sort of logistics. All right. Now, somebody else was asking a question right after Susan started.
I came in the middle. Hi, good evening, everyone. I was wondering, I heard something about an editor. Do you hire an editor, you said?
Yeah, so let's say that you have finished your study, you're finishing the writing of your dissertation. It really depends. It depends upon what your suggestion, the suggestions from your supervisor are. Some people are a superb, immaculate, APA knowledgeable aficionados, and maybe that person doesn't require an editor. Most people will. And the formal process is to, when you submit your paper, as I was saying down here in this slide right here, the final steps. Mm-hmm. You're basically, there's a contact. Her name's Lily Scarbino. And you're going to contact whoever this person is at the time and say, okay, I've finished my project, whatever. Do you have a suggested editor in mind, or can I use my own, so on and so forth? Know that if you go through that process, and most of the time it is required, just be mindful the internal one, whoever they use in SJU, is going to be heavily discounted compared to what the price would be on the outside. I know because years and years ago I did some of that work, and generally it's like, I want to say it might be a couple bucks a page or whatever the number is. Mm-hmm. So early in my career, I used to do those and get $750 or $1,000. So
yeah,
just keep that in mind, that it is a process, but the degree with which you pay is basically how good or bad is your writing, and how close is it to APA, and you know what I mean? Does it have flow? All those kind of things. Does it require revision, or is it just simply editing? And is just copy editing easy stuff or more advanced stuff? But that'll be down the road towards the end.
Dr. Ortlieb?
Yes.
So for the summer.
Okay.
You said that the deadline for submission isn't set yet, but it will be set. How plausible is it to get through the summer with everybody's vacations?
You're saying for a study such as your own, you're saying?
Right.
So I'll give you historical data on that. So a group that's ahead of you, I had one person who I was major supervisor for finish in the summer, and I had one person finish in the spring. So is it possible? Yeah. Were those people like busting their bums, doing all this stuff till 3 a.m. and whatever else? Sometimes. The one in the summer is actually quite doable depending upon your study. And I'll give you some advice there too. Let's go back to this part. Okay. So let's say that you're waiting on the IRB. Let's say you're waiting a month kind of for that process to go. Well, my question to you is, what are you doing during that month? Are you working? And are you working on finishing your lit review? Are you cleaning up the intro? Are you doing parts of the discussion such as implications, directions for future study, delimitations, all this kind of stuff? Can you write half of that even before the study starts? And my supposition is that oftentimes you can as a starting place. You can't necessarily do much of chapter 4, and you can't discuss the results, but you can tease out all those other dimensions. You can finalize your figures. You can clean up your reference page. You can make sure that you figured out the table of contents, because I'll tell you right now, if you haven't figured out a table of contents in Microsoft Word, it is a beast, okay? Figuring out how, I mean, you've done this on master's papers, maybe other doctoral degrees.
Yeah.
Figuring out section breaks, figuring out how to number pages and change the headers here and there. All that takes there's a learning curve. So I would highly suggest doing all of those bits during the points of time where you're waiting. Does that kind of indirectly answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Dr. Otley?
Yes.
Yeah, I sent out a question through the survey, a link, but maybe it was a bit too late.
Okay.
Yeah, when talking about timelines and how fast we can complete, I had a colleague who is in a different institution, who is almost through their PhD, say, oh, you know, when you attain your PhD, like in a very short period, you are looked at outside there as an underbaked person. They believe the longer the process, the more matured and seasoned you are. What do you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair question. So I think there's kind of two different takes on this. I would actually split it soft sciences versus hard sciences. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times in the hard sciences, you know, you'll have something that's left to chance. Let's say you're doing a lab and you're trying to mate, you know, fruit flies, and you're trying to create a brand new, you know, type of fruit fly with these genotypes and phenotypes and so on. Okay.
Yeah.
And you might have to go in there, and it might take years and years and years. In the soft sciences, it really depends. So if you're doing more of a qualitative look, let's say a purely qualitative dissertation, oftentimes those are actually much longer than purely quantitative. Why? Because sometimes it's easy to put the number 2 versus talk about what does 2 mean, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, I've seen qualitative papers that go 400 or 500 pages sometimes, whereas some of the quantitative ones are closer to 100, 150, or whatever it might be. So, you know, sometimes that matters. What I would say is a bigger determinant and something to really consider is, what publications have you tried to pursue during your degree program? So I know for 3290, some of you had me, some of you had Michael Sampson, and had varying levels of success trying to get something published already. Let's say that you're waiting on your IRB to go through and so on. Maybe you're teasing out part of your literature review to be a meta-analysis that you try to submit for a paper. Or maybe you're trying to submit your overall work in progress to be able to present that at a national forum or a conference, right?
Yeah.
So you'll see us posting some of those things on Facebook and some of the other social media platforms, because that's where you beef up your resume, your CV, and your worthiness to participate on an even playing field with other faculty in the field. So I don't necessarily, so somebody recently asked me, who was about to apply for the program, you know, I'm 25 years old, I'm young, you know, is that going to be looked down upon, and so on? And I'll tell you briefly my own experiences with some of that, because I might not be the oldest person in the book, but maybe I have some years under my belt. And I think some of the things that matter for me is I did have some of those publications prior to graduation.
Yeah.
So I did have that track record that I'm hungry, that I know how to participate, I know how to do research,
Yeah.
I got some practice teaching adults in the andragogy and what does that entail? Because it's a whole different beast than pedagogies and teaching kiddos. And so how have you addressed some of that is probably more important than how many years were you in the program,
Okay.
or even what did your project bring new to the field. So your dissertation is one element, but these other parts that I talked about are equally, if not more important towards success if you have an academic pursuit in mind in terms of a career, teaching at the college level or university that values research as much as teaching and so forth.
Okay, that brings me to my second question where, thank you so much about that information.
Sure.
Because that actually makes me ease up, because you're like, supposing my study doesn't entail me to take so long, should I just drag the process so that I look like I took longer?
No.
Yeah,
We're not gonna do all that. No.
Okay, and then secondly, like I mentioned also, I came across information through Handshake, which is brought to us through our institution, where SUNY Oneonta were, they had opportunities for PhD candidates who are at the dissertation level, but they should have been in, I think, in their first year of dissertation by August this year, and where they get you in their department, they give you either a course to teach,
Yeah, so a lot of
as they mentor you, and also fund your research. Yeah.
So there are different kind of doctoral programs, and it really depends upon the university with which that your program falls under. Many of them, let's say that you're at a large Research One institution that has undergraduate education programs, for example. So where I was at Louisiana State University, I had a doctoral fellowship. And so as part of that fellowship, I would teach one undergraduate class per semester. So that's where I got that experience from.
Yeah.
Part of that also came with free tuition minus the fees, or plus the fees, however you look at it. So, that was an incredible blessing that I was able to get that. Not every university has those. Right now in our literacy program, we have one. So they're really challenging to come by. And once that person has it, they might have it for 3 years or so. So I think those have gotten harder and harder to get as universities have experienced financial difficulties, if you want to call it that. So the opportunities when those arise, I'm all for. And as those come up internally, I try to spread that information. It's just sometimes they don't always come up, honestly.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Dr. Olive, it's Sheila. Can you see me?
I can't see you, but we can hear you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
In terms
I know what you look like. All good.
Okay. I mean, I did my hair today, but okay.
Exactly. I can tell. Yeah.
I was wondering, just to piggyback off what she said, I wasn't quite sure what you were talking about the fellowship, but do the program allow to teach undergrad courses?
So the issue there is the undergraduate classes in our School of Education are housed in a separate department. And so that's essentially at the discretion of that department chair. Okay. I can say from experience, I think one or two people might have done that over the last, let's say, 5 years or so. If you send me an email, or actually you can just email the person straight up and CC me if you'd like consideration for that. The person's name is Daniel Ness. So I'm not sure if it's Daniel.net or it's probably Ness D at St. John's, but you can Google that and just ask him if there might be some opportunities in that, and just say that, you're part of my program, yada, yada, and you can send him your CV and maybe your teaching experiences just to see if there's anything open in that regard.
Would it matter if I have prior experience just teaching like freshman seminars?
I mean, it could. That's so he would be in charge of the undergraduate curriculum and instruction department. But you might also find some folks, I don't know the chair right now in English, which is in arts and sciences. but they may have a freshman seminar or something like that, English 1, those sorts of things that they could have a need for. I'm not really sure there.
Thank you. And my second question was changing methods. You mentioned about, she was speaking on, you were mentioning like a qualitative method could be all the way to 500 pages where quantitative could be less. I'm a mixed method person. I love mixed method. I haven't perfected it yet, I guess. But my question is, could I change that to qualitative if I saw that down the line what my advisor suggests?
Yeah, I mean, that's really discussion for your supervisor and you to tease out. Now, I would say that I would always want to use the best methods to answer my research questions.
Right.
So I want you to start with the research questions and then kind of think about it from there. And again, if you want a second opinion or whatever else, that's really where your team comes in, especially that person for the research and the design piece.
Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure they would guide me into,
Sure.
if I'm overthinking it or.
No. I think those are very fair questions.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? I see we got 4.5 minutes before this one hits the kill switch again.
Dr. Ortlieb, I have a question.
Okay.
It's
Is this Helena?
Yeah, it's Helena.
Okay.
Hi.
Okay.
Hi,
Hi.
everyone. Nice to be
Hi.
with you today.
Nice meeting you too.
Pleasure. You've been through this a lot of times. Where do people usually have the most difficulty? I know it's a hard question.
No. So the bottlenecks for me, number one, the biggest one is people who are not independently driven enough to write their dissertation already and get it done, right? So I shouldn't have to be the one who takes off my belt and kind of helps somebody along through the process, right? Like some people, and again, I'm speaking frankly here, continue to accrue, financial aid or debt or whatever you want to call it. But for whatever reason, they can't get over that hurdle of doing the writing. Some have even collected the data. They can't do the writing. And to me, that's the biggest one. So don't find yourself in that pot, if you will. The second bottleneck, I would say, is quickly getting through the IRB, as we kind of talked about before. But you've done that before, most likely, so it shouldn't be an issue for you. And then if I thought of a third one, is similar to IRB, just the permissions at the school, student, and possibly parent level, and getting those done. I'm going to give you a quick suggestion here. Much like the feds use opt-out forms, I highly suggest you look into that. Meaning, can you write a permission slip that says, so-and-so will be participating in this study unless you tick here and return this form. So it's going to happen unless they return the form, is very different than, can Billy be part of this project? Click yes or no.
Makes sense.
Okay. Now, again, you kind of learn this along the way, right? And to what degree is that ethical? I would say, is this stuff that's already going on in the school? Are you just they're doing a new intervention and you're just trying to measure the results of it and so on? Mm-hmm. I don't see that as a big deal. It's going to happen anyway, right? So can we use Billy's scores? And I would say that we're going to use everybody's scores unless you say otherwise. And that's the same technique that the feds use to be able to test all of our kids, right? That's why all that data goes into these public databases. You actually gave consent. You didn't read it when you signed saying Sally's going to second grade, but it was somewhere in there. It was an opt-out.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Anything else?
So when the semester is commencing?
I think it's January 22. I think it's that Wednesday.
Yes.
And is it after that when we can send the initial proposal for the IRB to the supervisor?
No.
I mean, at what point can we send the initial proposal for the IRB clearance if we think that we are ready with it?
It took from day one, I think. Day one of the semester.
So I would send the paper that you have in one file to the supervisor, talk with that person about when you're going to be ready to defend the proposal. And then once you defend the proposal, then you can go forward with the IRB process. Now, do you have something in place with your supervisor, whether it be you or somebody else, and everybody's on board and it's behind the scenes and something or another? That's technically your business. But I'm just sort of providing you with what is a best set of recommendations.
You mentioned links, Professor. Dr. Orlev, you mentioned links and getting us something. What did you say earlier?
I'm going to send these recordings as well as the handbook to you right away. And then there's going to be a Blackboard portal for $32.93 that you're going to have access to the first day of the semester.
Okay.
Now, this video is going to end. Does anybody need to ask further questions? I can create a third link if you'd like.
Sorry, I think we have 1 minute.
Okay, so Envy, what was your question?
I think when we talked about this is Susan who asked about the difficulties in the dissertation program, and then you talked of the writer's block, you know, the procrastination and so on, then getting permissions, wherever. I think the third hurdle is that the first defense, because it entails so much, like the preparation, the do's and don'ts. Because before you touched on that, I was about to ask you, why does, I know people go through defense and sometimes they're taken aback because of issues they need to address. So it's like, if I've been working with a committee and we're reading on the same page, how does it come that you reach that point of defense and you're told, no, this is not a researchable topic, you know?
Right. Well, so I'll say a few things here. Number one, I try to include committee members who would be willing to work with people almost universally, okay? So I'll just say that, and you can read between the lines that I just told you.
Yeah.
Historically, at other universities, there have been those people where it's taken 7, 8, 10 years, whatever, go back, redo it, go back, redo it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always found that that was more of an issue with whoever the supervisor was.
Yeah.
Because that supervisor would always have people that took 6, 7, 8 years and all that. And I'm not going to invite somebody like that to be on any of these committees. And if I ever find that that is part of what's going on, then I'll have some, let's call it an influx of jurisdiction that might occur to make sure that the word supervision is the correct term that really describes what's going on. I don't want it to be a dictator who stops the process. I really want it to be somebody who acts as a sounding board, somebody who's going to point you back towards those resources. And I mean, basically the way that I try to run things is predicated on the mentors I've had over the years, as well as some of the things that I might not have had that I wish I did during the process.
Okay. I can trust you on that, because I know I keep telling people I interact with about the program. I tell them, like, I didn't expect this out of an online program. It's so intense. It's almost like a face-to-face program because of, the way it's been so intense and rigorous. Everything, even our comprehensive exams and so on. And I trust that we'll have a better experience, or a good experience, if we work hard towards it.
Yeah, I mean, so for example, I had some individual meetings with the folks who didn't pass their comprehensive exams.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to tease out on the individual level, where did you go offline? What happened here?
Yeah.
How do we think about the reviewer's data? How do we clean things up so that when you do the retake, we can have good results? I think the challenge for online instruction is about making things as personal as possible, even though it's in an asynchronous environment. And I think that's really the challenge, to get it sort of a best practice, if you will.
And then I would like to thank you very much for being on top of things, or like going with the current trends in research, because the APM 7th edition, I use CCSU library, like they think I'm even a student there. So like one of the librarians, I went and I want to borrow that APS 7th edition. It's like, no, we currently using. She didn't know they have it on the shelf, and she's at the reference section. So thank you so much. Yeah, it helps so much. And just for my other colleagues, if they have not interacted with it so much, I try to use it for the comps and the dissertation seminar. There are conspicuous differences between it and the 6th edition. And if you use it, it's very, very helpful. So
Okay, no, that's good to know. Thank you for that, Indy.
Yeah, in my case,
go ahead, Samendra.
yeah, in my case, I'm a little bit in a peculiar position. I don't know whether I'm lucky or unlucky. I am assigned with a supervisor with whom I have never worked with actually. So he is not aware of all my research topic. All these days, whatever I have thought, whatever I worked with and was corrected and guided by all other professors, is completely new to me.
Me too.
That I'm in a disadvantageous position for that.
You're not alone.
So Samendra, you're in a particular case, and I'm happy to talk to you on a different video link about that specifically based on the email that I sent you there. But I don't think you're going to have a problem, and maybe in 15 minutes we can have a quick chat about that. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
No problem. Envy, who is yours? Remind me.
I have to go to my
Okay.
email, Doctor.
We can tease that out sometime too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Lastly, my last question.
Okay.
I know you talked of the longitudinal study taking longer, like if I'm doing it. That's what I intend for my dissertation, but then I wanted the first part where I'm doing the dissertation, when after I graduate, like I want to progress with the same study, but not doing like longitudinal for my dissertation. Is that possible?
Yeah, so let me give you another trick of the trade. All right. So let's say that that you tell the IRB that my dissertation includes this umbrella of data collection and analysis. Okay. And your dissertation ends up being only part of that umbrella of data that you collected. Okay.
Yeah.
So you said you were going to investigate your kids, and you have 5 kids, and you only ended up writing your dissertation on 2 or 3 of those kids. Okay. What do I do with that other data that I still have? Did you put in the IRB consent, I wanted to use this data for the next 5 years, the next 7 years? What did you stipulate in that form? And the question there is, that really provides you with additional data with which to write more papers from. So the people in ed leadership have mastered this for years and years and years. And I think we need to be smarter about what data we collect, and then writing about a slice of it, and then having additional ammunition from which to continue to prosper with publications and presentations and so on. So you have to be a little bit crafty about how you write all of that up to make sure it fits the ethical dimensions and requirements. But it's a practice that that I think is important, especially for those who want the academic track for a career.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Susan, were you saying something?
I just wanted to share that I ordered the 7th edition the beginning of last semester, and I'm getting emails about shipping delays. So for any of you that haven't ordered it, hop on it, because I'm now trying to look for another source or shipping.
To know that.
So in the portal, I have I think like a 2-page printout of some differences, as well as some girl's video who she said like 17 changes, blah, 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 on YouTube. So, you know, I kind of teased that out as a starting point. But hopefully by the time that we get to the real changes, like one of the changes is something that I've been doing anyway. You're only supposed to have 1 space between sentences instead of 2 spaces. Oh, yeah. Right? I never really liked 2 spaces, so I never.
Yeah, it was too.
So
makes the document too bulky for no reason.
It just looks it makes it look weird. And then when you do the find and insert, then sometimes it'll put 3 spaces in there, you know, if it was already 2. So.
And then Susan, you can try, because like me before, I wanted to buy, then I thought, let me check with the library, and any university libraries have them. Like although Yeah, and then what I did, because you can't carry it out, they allow you to scan certain pages. So the very important pages I scanned, I have them
Smart.
in PDF. Yeah. So.
Okay. Yeah, so you could get an
you.
example, like I was
Yeah.
saying, you know, of an edited book, of an article, of a book, of a you know, website, or so on. Yeah. And please don't underestimate like the first 15 pages of the APA manual, where it talks about what goes in an introduction, what, you know, how do you tease out the research. Like, they know what they're talking about, trust me.
Yeah.
And the more I read that kind of work, the better I did on my dissertation and articles that ensued, in terms of trying to present things in a succinct fashion. Okay. Adele or Helena, Sheila, Samindra, anybody else with questions?
Yeah, I noticed that my dissertation part 2, the professor changed. It's Molly Ness now. It was before Dustling, I think. You switched it up?
Yeah, I have Molly Ness too.
It wouldn't have been Dustling.
Wasn't her? Oh, okay.
I might have preliminarily sent somebody else, but that person couldn't do it, so I did the substitution.
I had Hoffman first, and then I had Molly Ness.
Okay, so that was the substitution that I had.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Is she nice? I mean, I haven't.
I like them equally.
Nice is relative.
They're both rock stars, so you don't have anything to worry about. Again, I tried not to include anybody on anybody's who wasn't going to be supportive. So
I can tell you guys, I've seen Molly present in person, and she's terrific and
really
friendly and easy to work with.
Susan probably saw her present with Doug and Nancy.
Yep.
Okay. Hi, Susan.
Hi.
All right. So with that, let's leave it here. As you come up with some subsequent questions in the next week or so, whatever, feel free to send me those. If I get a slew of them, maybe I'll put all the answers together in an email to everybody. I'll post these 3 recordings. I'll send them over within 30 minutes or so. And Samindra, I'll send you an email right now with a specific link.
Thank you so much. You're the best.
All right, everybody.
Thank you very
Have a great
much.
night. All the
Good
best.
to see you all.
Thank you for your time.
No problem.
you.
Take care.
Take care.